Welcome back, everyone. It's just another day in the life of a military wife. And I have noticed I call it the alphabet soup of the military, but pretty much every organization I've ever been a part of, and just as Americans in general, we seem to use a lot of acronyms. And when we first got into the military, I kind of felt like people were speaking a different language. So I wanted to address that. There are a lot of acronyms in the military, and there's no way I can cover them all in this one episode. But I want to hit 3 different categories of acronyms and kind of just break down differences and things like that. Give you a general idea of what people are talking about when they start throwing around some things. Some you'll be familiar with, some you might not be. I'm trying to pick really important ones, but I am going to link in below a really great database that has not all, but a ton more. So, that said, this is your host, Sam Wolf, and you are listening to The Life of a Military Wife. Okay, so first things first. Sometimes you will run into acronyms in the military and they do not mean what they mean to us as civilians. I found a few examples of this. In all honesty, I found instances where acronyms that I use for church do not correlate with the same acronyms meaning in the military, obviously. But that's specialized to that. But these are 2 that you hear. For example, IRS. When most Americans hear the term or the acronym IRS, we think of the Internal Revenue Service, the people who check our taxes and all that sort of stuff. But in the military, IRS actually means Inertial Reference System. Or at least it can. It also can mean the IRS, but that's one of those instances where it may not mean what you think it means because there's the civilian and the military. Another one I found was NBC. When I hear NBC, I tend to think of the news organization. Well, in the military, NBC means nuclear, biological, and chemical. And that is rather different than the National Broadcasting Service. So it goes without saying that sometimes what you're hearing is not what you think you're hearing. But by and large, context will tell you that. The next concepts you kind of have to come to grips with is that the same acronym can have multiple meanings in the military. Again, context clues will usually make sense of what you can tell what the person actually means. So DA means Department of the Air Force or Direct Action or Double Agent. And generally, I hope with the context you know which one they're talking about. EW can be early warning or electronic warfare. Again, context. LAD is latest arrival date or launch area denied. MAP is medical advisory panel or military assistance program. Knowing the difference between those, since they're more organizational, it is important. POC can be point of contact or privately owned conveyance. And this one actually tripped me up because I was in a meeting with someone. It was a military and civilian collaboration meeting. And they said POC. And I'm like, what does my vehicle have anything to do with this? And I had to pause and realize that that's not what they meant. They meant point of contact, which should have been obvious, but took me a few seconds, and I'm glad I didn't say anything and point out the fact that I didn't get it at first, because I would have looked really silly. The next is SAC, which could be school age care or strategic air command. And I just don't see anyone mixing those two up, but that's just me. The last one I wanted to point out was TA. And this one, again, I don't see anyone getting these mixed up based on contextual clues. It's tuition assistance, target audience, and threat assessment. I mean, the first two maybe could be a little close, but yeah, threat assessment probably nowhere near that. Just saying. But that's my personal opinion on that one. And there are differences between the different branches of the service, but I'm not going to get into those because that could take all day. If you really want to know more about the differences between the services, and I'm going just on acronyms here, I'm not even going in lingo, let me know. We could dig into that. But yeah, there's a lot of vocabulary that is special to the military. So the other issue I have found in my personal life experience is that depending on what part of the country you're from, people either spell out acronyms or they pronounce acronyms. And because the military is a, melting pot of people from all over, there's a weird combination of both in the use of the military acronyms. Some are said as words and some are spelt out. The first time I traveled to another part of the country and was interacting with people and acronyms came up, I got really confused because I didn't know what they were saying. And then someone had to explain to me, that little tidbit that I just shared. So, there are a ton. I mostly pulled out ones that I feel like you are going to hear more commonly if you interact with military families or are important for new military families to understand. But there is a ton out there. So again, I'm only hitting some really, really basic ones. First one is BAH, and that's basic... basic allowance for housing. Yes. Wow, my notes are not as good as I thought. The other one is BAS, basic allowance for support, and BAH and BAS are two things that you want to know about when you first get in. BAH is how much you're going to get paid to find housing or to cover your housing. So if you're living off post, super important to BAH. BAS is basic support, so it's basically how much they're giving you for food and stuff like that for your family. And there are going to be times where if your military personnel in your family is away, they can take away your BAS for a while. So knowing when and you've got BAS and when you're not going to have BAS is important. The CDC is the Child Development Center. It's basically the daycare center for kids on post. And it's not just daycare. They do other stuff, but basically it's child care for military personnel or DoD personnel. DEERS. This one is super important. And it's funny because you have BAH, BAS, CDC. Those are all ones where we say the letters. DEERS, maybe it's just because it's longer, we usually say as a word. And that's the Defense Enrollment Eligibility and Support System. And every military family is going to become oh so fond of DEERS. DEERS is basically where you can make sure you've got all of your family information up to date. If you have a kid, you need to register them with DEERS so that you can get them registered with TRICARE so they have health care services and all that other stuff. DEERS is if you need to get an ID, your military ID updated or issued, you go to DEERS. So yeah, DEERS is, not something you're ever going to be able to avoid. So just become good friends with DEERS. DEERS is, honestly, most of the people I've met with DEERS and worked with DEERS are really, really kind, sweet people. One thing you will need to know, and this is just a side caveat, if you are going to get your ID for the first time yourself and your military service member is still in basic or advanced training, then you will probably need a power of attorney. Well, actually, you will need a power of attorney to get it. So it's always good to have that because we had some issues with I needed to get one of my kids onto Deers, and my husband was gone, and I couldn't find my power of attorney, and I ended up finding it. But yeah, um, just keep track of those. There's important information. Yeah. Anyway, DEF CON. Now, I think DEF CON is something that's thrown out in Hollywood and TV and all of that very frequently, and people think they know what DEF CON is, and more or less they do. But the actual definition, what it stands for, is Defense Readiness Condition. And there was a change during COVID because they had basically a health DEFCON level. So they had a defense condition level based on security procedures. And then they had basically the COVID status. And that was a new one for everyone. So that was interesting. DFAS is Defense Finance and Accounting Services. DFAS is important. They basically, they control your pay. They're the ones that take care of your pay, and your pay is important, or at least I think getting paid is important. DFAS, another one that's really good to know. Diddy is one you'll hear a lot, and it's do it yourself, and it's usually in reference to moving. The military will pay and arrange for a company to come pack, ship, and unpack all your belongings when you move. However, if you want to do it yourself, or even do a partial Diddy, in other words, partially do it yourself, you can be compensated, and whatever expenses you incur, the Army will pay you back. So some people really like doing that because they like the control that they have. And lately, that's been a necessity because everything got really out of whack with moves and PCS, or permanent change of station, in this last year or so. And so there's been backups with some of the moving companies that are traditionally used, and people are being told, well, if you want to have your household goods shipped in this time frame, we recommend you do it yourself. So it is what it is. Another one that is unique to the military that most people don't know about, but you will encounter very quickly usually, is EFMP, Exceptional Family Member Program. And this organization's responsibility is to track the specific medical and otherwise needs of family members, of service members, and make sure that they are in locations that can meet those needs. So, for example, if you have a family member who has got a disability, hearing impaired, visually impaired, they've got a learning disability, a child with a learning disability, they'll make sure that there's schools with programs to help your child. If you have, we've had a friend who had a medical condition that restricted where they could live. The EFMP will help make sure that you don't get assigned in areas that would be detrimental to the health of your family members, or be incapable of providing for those family members. So the EFMP is important. It's important to make sure you keep it up to date. To get into the EFMP program, you need to get an appointment, specifically set up an EFMP appointment with your primary care physician member. Anyway, your doctor, and they'll go through the paperwork with you, fill it out, and then you turn it into the EFMP office. Some of the EFMP organizations on different posts will do special things for the holidays or activities. They'll get discounts or stuff like that for these families. And I think it's incredible. I've seen a lot of amazing work done through the people that work for this program. And it's a wonderful service that is offered. The other one is FSA, or Family Support Allowance. And that is also, it goes into pay. And there's a lot of acronyms that are a part of your pay. And knowing what they mean and when you get them and why you don't get them is super, super, super important. And so the database that I'm going to be linking is super helpful when you're going through your pay statement and you're seeing all of this alphabet soup craziness and you're like, what the heck does that mean? It'll help you understand it. So next one is IFF, or identification friend or foe. I just thought that was funny because I've heard that in a couple movies and I didn't know exactly what it meant. Like stood for exactly, like in context clues you could figure it out, but it was interesting to see it actually enumerated. So that one I just threw in for kicks and giggles. The next one is JAG. Again, I feel like most Americans have a general concept on what JAG is, but in a nutshell, JAG is the legal services of the military. It actually stands for the Judge Advocacy General. And so basically the military has lawyers that will help out with certain things if you need to get stuff done, like a will or whatnot. But they also will represent you if you, for example, get a speeding ticket on post and have to go in front of the judge on post. So yeah, there's a lot of different things that the JAG does. It's, no offense, I don't think as glamorous as the TV show lets on. Maybe it is. I don't know. If you're in JAG and you feel that the TV show does you justice, please let me know. I'd like to know that. But yeah, so that's that one. LES is another really important one when it comes to your finances and stuff. LES is your leave and earning statement. So it's basically your paycheck stub that breaks down your pay and what you're getting paid and why. But it also tracks your leave, and your leave is your time off. So knowing how to access your LES, knowing how to read your LES is super important for military families. And it can be a little tricky, in getting a friend or someone who's been in a little longer to kind of walk you through it if you're having trouble is a good thing. The next is MEPS, and I think that's one of the first bits of alphabet soup we all get exposed to, because that is the Military Entrance Processing Station. So MEPS is where you go to pick your MOS, get all of your testing and assessment done, initially take the oath, like sign your contracts and all that crazy stuff. It's in processing. And there's a lot of different MEPs all over. So there's not just one. NCO is one that I think sometimes confuses civilians, or at least I have met people confused by that term. It means non-commissioned officer, which makes some people think it's a warrant officer sort of situation, and it's not. I hope everyone realizes NCO means senior enlisted. It means sergeant, basically. Different level of sergeants, but sergeants nonetheless. Another phrase that you'll run into is OCONUS and CONUS, and it goes back to the whole Diddy thing. These are terms you most commonly find in reference to moves. OCONUS is outside of the continental United States, and CONUS means continental United States. So if you're moving outside of the continental U.S., that's an OCONUS move. If you are staying inside, it's CONUS. But most people don't say CONUS when they're staying inside the states. That's just not... It seems kind of really long. It's just PCS at that point, permanent change of station. And that was one I didn't exactly include on the list just because I say PCS a lot and I've described what PCS means a lot, that I hope by this point everyone knows that that means permanent change of station. So MOS is a term that I have found used in some branches, but not in others. And according to the database I ran into, MOS should be standard, but I don't feel like it is. MOS is military, basically what your specialization is. And of course, I forgot what all the little letters stood for because, note taking. Anyway, but basically, it's what's your job. I feel like I've heard different branches use different acronyms to indicate that, but that was in there too. So that one's one that's kind of tricky because according to this database, that's universal across the branches. However, I feel like it's not. So the last one I'm going to cover is actually one I learned, first encountered as a civilian, and that's OCS, Officers Candidate School. So Officer Candidate School, there is a couple of different ways to become an officer. And one of them is Officer Candidate School. And the first most common way is ROTC. So going to college, doing the ROTC program, and basically joining the military while in college with the understanding you'll be an officer when you get out. And I know there's more to it than that, but I feel like most people know what ROTC is, or at least I hope you do. A less common one is Officer Candidate School, and that is for people who were enlisted first or things like that, and then want to become an officer. Usually, I feel like they don't have college degrees, and that's why they have to go this route. Maybe I'm mistaken, but that's what I'm more familiar with. Another one, and this is the Army term, and I'm sure there's other terms for it, but it's like green to gold. Basically, the concept where you can go from being an enlisted to being an officer by going back to college, taking a break more or less from active duty, and becoming and kind of like doing ROTC and finishing your degree. They don't really, that's like a packet that takes work to get accepted to. My best advice that I really have seen over and over again is if you want to be an officer, just do it straight out, because it is possible to go from being enlisted to officer, but it can get a little tricky. And there's a lot of people who want to do that and not a lot of spaces. So if you are enlisted and you aren't able to go officer, warrant officer is actually a really good option. And warrant officer is kind of like the secret middleman of the military. They are not exactly a commissioned officer, but they're not enlisted. They're kind of in their own little special side shoot of the normal command system. And they usually have very specified, specific jobs based on what the MOS is. MOS is of the individual. That's basically a really brief, quick rundown. And I'm saying quick, but this is over 20 minutes. And I have barely scratched the surface. If there are acronyms that you don't understand that you would like have explained, go ahead. Ask me in the comments below. I'm more than willing to get you the information if I can find it, which I'm pretty sure I can. Also, there'll be the database, but it is a completely different language. I feel like the military can almost feel like a different culture. And there is kind of a culture shock sometimes when you transition from civilian life to military life. And I feel like the best advice I could give anyone is find a buddy. Find someone who's been there, done that, got some time under their belt and knows basically what direction they're going, and learn everything you can from them. That's what I did, and it has helped a lot. And honestly, I still feel like I have a lot to learn. So I hope this was helpful. And yeah, that if you do have any questions, feel free, comment below. That said, this is your host, Sam Wolf, and you've been listening to Life of a Military Wife.